Power of the Roar by InkyTalon. Chapter 1 Found. Milele. It means forever, and that's a mighty long time for Scar to wait for his time. The lion known as Scar paced forward, his paw steps heavy, and he sank lazily to the ground as he watched the members of his pride from his vantage point, a dark corner of Pride Rock. Today, a new huntress has come of age and is ready to begin her first solo hunt. The lionesses all gathered in the sunlight, chanting her name in unison. "Seraphina! Seraphina!" The blue-eyed lioness in question beamed, her chin high, as her king congratulated and encouraged her. Scar wouldn't dream of joining them. He envied the females greatly, being so skilled in hunting. And he was a male without a destiny, which made him feel utterly useless by comparison. He'd given up on pretending to be happy for others, especially the lion of whom he was most jealous of. Mufasa, the Lion King of Milele, and, regrettably, his brother. Scar watched the king join in on the lioness's little party. He looked disgustingly majestic, with the setting sun itself as his backdrop, shining through his mane. He could see all the females gazing at him with admiration. It was enough to make Scar sick. It was Mufasa's mate Sarabi who cheered the loudest for Seraphina. The two lionesses had become rather close since she, Mufasa, and Scar joined this pride. His vivid green eyes fixated on her, and he braced himself knowing her beauty alone was enough to shred his heart apart. She should have been his, but fate had been cruel and she chose Mufasa over him. In fact, it was all Sarabi's fault that Scar lost his right to his kingship. But he couldn't bring himself to blame her, even now. Not when she was so lovely in this light. Seasons ago, he had silently sworn himself to Sarabi, despite her interest in Mufasa. And Scar still sought to honor that pledge, through drought and famine, fire and flood. They were meant to be together. Still, Scar just knew it as surely as he knew the rains would come. After the chanting was over with, Mufasa began giving Seraphina a tired old speech about respecting the circle of life, that he'd probably give to every lioness on their first hunt. Well, at least Scar thought it was boring. But the lionesses and Sarabi listened with reverence, of course, hanging on Mufasa's every word as always. Scar couldn't understand how they could put up with that sort of restriction. Doesn't respecting this so-called circle of life just take all the fun out of hunting? Out of being a lion? Scowling, Scar tried to shut out his brother's voice. Nothing about this ceremony excited him. Not even the promise of Seraphina bringing a fresh kill later at night. During the first several weeks of Mufasa's reign, Scar had been coming to eat last, due to his own feelings of guilt. He'd settled for scraps and gotten thin. Now his appetite was growing again, but after all this time, the pride expected him to eat last. To suddenly demand more would surely make him appear as an upstart, as if he were challenging Mufasa. If he were king, no lion would go hungry. He would make 2 kills a day, for every one of Mufasa's. Finally, after another round of encouragement, Seraphina was sent away, and she bounded off into the thick of the savannah in the direction of some herd that Mufasa had picked out for her. That was something else Scar hated about his brother, that he had a special talent. Mufasa could sense the presence of prey miles away. He could sense danger, too. This power of Mufasa's saved their hides once or twice on the journey here, but Scar found it difficult to be grateful. It was just another way that Mufasa greatly outshined him. The pride watched Seraphina until she disappeared from sight far off in the distance, and then the lions dispersed, going about their normal daily activities. But Mufasa lingered and turned fully around to look in the direction of Scar. To his surprise, Scar's breath hitched as their eyes met across the expanse. He could detect old pain and a strongly held grudge in Mufasa's gaze, even from this distance. That he expected. But there was another emotion hidden in the king's eyes, too. Something deeper. Something like longing. But before Scar could discern what Mufasa was thinking, his brother broke away from the tense stare and joined Sarabi, walking along at her side. The weight of the pride's scorn was unbearable, and the ache of wanting forgiveness, wanting Mufasa's approval, still lingered deep in Scar's chest. Mufasa was the only pride member that paid him any attention anymore, and what he offered was very little. Scar died a little every day, knowing that their relationship would never be the same, and there was no going back. But the more he waited on Mufasa's forgiveness, the more bitter he became. Enough time had passed since that fateful day, enough time spent in the dark. He was entitled to Mufasa's forgiveness. He deserved it, didn't he? After all, he saved Mufasa's life several times. At any rate, if he didn't get Mufasa's forgiveness soon, well, he won't offer his brother any mercy when he takes back the throne. With a heavy sigh, Scar pushed himself up, his paws sinking into the earth as he made his way towards his watering hole. Not the pride's watering hole, but his, a smaller one. Close enough to be considered part of Pride Rock's territory, but more isolated. Just how he liked it, and just how the pride liked it too. Perhaps a drink would calm his mind, take him out of this restless stupor. Scar reached the end of his trek and neared the water's edge. He lowered his head to drink the cool water in the shade of a large, dead tree. He kept his eyes open as he soothed his parched throat to observe the tree's gnarled roots, hearkening back to the days of his cubhood when he first met Mufasa. They had raced together to a tree much like this one. That was the day they became brothers. Scar was unsure how he felt about the memory now, with motions of fondness and regret conflicting within. "Hey, I didn't say you could drink here." What was that? Scar yelped at the sudden disturbance and sprang into the air, his blackened mane spiking up in fear. The lion lowered himself in a defensive crouch and readied himself for danger, cowardice gleaming in his wild eyes. "Who's there?" Scar growled with as much menace as he could muster, trying to control his shaking. "This is my watering hole. Didn't you notice my scent marks? I found it, and it's mine." Scar snarled low in contempt hearing this, his fear melting away quickly. "Ah, your watering hole, is it?" He was in no mood for games, and he would defend what little left he could claim as his. He angled himself in the direction of the voice. His haunches shook from the tension of his muscles. Then he pounced into the tall grass, with black claws unsheathed. Violently, he tumbled into the other animal, and they rolled together, kicking and struggling. In the chaos, Scar realized he was wrestling another lion, one smaller than himself. Scar heard her strained yowl, and shortly thereafter felt her swift kick to his stomach and the graze of sharp claws. The blow knocked the air from him, and he coughed. Though he figured he could overpower her fairly easily if he regained footing, she had him in a vulnerable position. And despite his vigor and ego, he was simply no good at fighting. So Scar made the wise decision to pull himself away from the angry stranger. The two lions caught their breath, each taking the opportunity to observe their opponent. The lioness was long and lithe, but small in frame, and Scar soon felt the tiniest bit ashamed for attacking her when he noticed the traces of cub fluff that still clung to her cheeks. Her eyes were a striking reddish gold, the fiercest eyes he'd ever seen despite her size, especially with them glaring directly at him. Between her ears, right down the middle of her head, was a distinctive dark brown stripe, which contrasted with the rest of her dust-colored fur. "Do you always pounce first and ask questions later?" she hissed at him. "No," Scar growled, still catching his breath. He was clearly out of shape. "But this pool belongs to me. Don't make me attack you again." "I don't think you will," taunted the young lioness. She smirked. "You seem pretty shaken. I saw how you jumped." Scar frowned, angry and embarrassed. "Even if you did attack," the lioness continued, "I can take you." "Oh, please," sneered Scar. "You're practically still a kid. You're too small to challenge me." The other narrowed her eyes. "Try me." Scar ground his claws into the dirt, considering teaching her a lesson, but decided she wasn't worth the effort. "I'm feeling generous today, so I won't right now, but I suggest you move on. I can easily inform my pride of your trespassing." Scar paused to nonchalantly groom himself, smoothing out his messied burnt orange fur to show her that he wasn't afraid. He then added, "I suspect you won't be so confident when facing an entire squadron of lionesses." The lioness didn't appear the least bit intimidated by his threat. Instead, she suddenly seemed rather curious. She took a paw step toward him, sniffing the air to familiarize herself with his scent. "Well, I'm Zira. What's your name?" Scar flinched. Why was the stray still bothering him? He didn't have to entertain this crazy lioness. He should just leave and inform the pride like he said he would. But something kept his paws rooted to the ground. Perhaps because this was the first interaction he'd had in a long time with a lion that didn't fully hate him yet. So he answered her. "My name is Scar." Zira made a face. "That's not your real name." Scar responded with a growl and a lash of his tail. "What?" "That's not your real name," Zira repeated with a laugh. "Come on, nobody's name is Scar." Scar stared at her for a moment, taken aback. "Well, mine is." "No, it's not. So I guess I'll have to call you something else until you tell me what your name is," Zira nagged. Then she closed her eyes and hummed in thought comically. "How about Dung Beetle?" Despite himself and his growing frustration, Scar almost smiled. This Zira was almost grown, but still retained some of the humor of a very young cub. "Dung Beetle?" "Still better than Scar." Scar thought about retorting with an "is not," but thought better of it. He was simply getting too old for silly cub arguments. Despite how far he'd fallen from grace, he still held himself in higher regard than that. So instead of engaging, he finally turned and padded away from her. He'd been outcast and estranged from Mufasa and his pride for months now, so long that having even a basic conversation like this seemed strenuous to him. He'd rather retreat back to his cave and forget this encounter ever happened. Where are you going, Dung Beetle?" Zira called after him, trotting to meet his gate. She emphasized his new nickname in a mocking tone that quickly made Scar's blood boil. He was no longer amused. "This conversation is over," he snapped, whipping around to snarl belligerently in Zira's face. "Why don't you just go back where you came from?" Again, Zira didn't flinch, to Scar's amazement and annoyance. It seemed as if she was used to this kind of rejection, of being unwanted. Still, hurt flickered in her crimson eyes. "I can't," she muttered hoarsely in reply. The sudden seriousness and pain in her voice caught Scar off guard, and suddenly he was uncomfortable. Why not?" Scar questioned, but he was already lifting a paw to start walking away again. "It would be pointless to go back. My pride is gone, since the outsiders..." "Outsiders?" Scar's paw returned to the earth, and he froze. Could she be speaking of the very same outsiders that tore apart his family, and later became his ill-fated allies? "White lions," Zira nodded, confirming his suspicions. She lowered her head in grief, completely letting her guard down. "Yes, I barely escaped with my life. They were vicious, especially their leader. I've been on my own ever since." Scar watched Zira intently as she told her story. It was brief, but it wasn't without impact. Scar's demeanor completely changed, along with the recognition that he and Zira had a tragedy in common. Scar opened his mouth to reply, but for a time, nothing came out save for a pitiful, strangled gasp. He felt a painful twinge in his heart, something like sympathy. Kiros and his band of outsiders had destroyed many prides, it was true, but he hadn't expected to meet a remnant of Kiros's reign of terror so long after the White Lion's defeat. How young must Zira have been when she escaped the outsiders? She had to have been a very small cub. How long had she been fighting to survive? "I've managed okay," Zira asserted, forcing an optimistic tone as she continued. "But I do hate spending every second just trying to make it to the next sunrise. I grew up in a pride. Now, nobody has my back. The things I've had to do just to eat," Zira groaned. "Lions are supposed to be better than that." "Zira, Scar furrowed his brow and cleared his throat, struggling to express what he wanted to. He wished to say that she could use his watering hole as she pleased. He wished to say he understood her. But he just felt too disconnected from himself to properly comfort her. And, as fate would have it, there would be no time anyway. A growl, deep and guttural, rolled through the twilight. Scar and Zira both snapped to attention, shifting closer to one another for safety. "What was that?" Scar whispered out loud. Zira didn't answer, only let out a low, distressed moan. Scar was immediately aware that she was definitely afraid this time, which shocked him. If she hadn't been afraid of him, a nearly fully grown male lion, then what could frighten Zira? "Into the water," Scar instructed, swatting at Zira with his claws sheathed to urge her onward. Zira hissed in response, but she obeyed him without question, stepping into the shallow pool. Scar followed suit. He'd always lacked the leader instincts that Mufasa seemed to have in spades, but he was glad that at least he'd successfully directed a lioness to safety this once. Their paws sank several inches into the mud, and the water was surprisingly chilly, in contrast to the warm evening air, making them both shiver. But it was better than the alternative, not seeing the enemies coming and being ambushed in the high grass. Within moments, a dozen strange animals emerged from that high grass, creatures unlike anything Scar had ever seen. They looked vaguely like hyenas at first glance, but upon closer inspection, they were actually completely different. Their fur was more vibrantly colored and sporadically patterned, more like patches than spots. The shape of their faces resembled a jackal's, and their ears were huge and round, like large discs attached to their heads. Their lean, sinewy forms moved in perfect, eerie unison. The sounds they made were a combination of otherworldly chirps, yips, and squeaks. Scar wondered if they were coordinating an attack in their strange language at this very moment. He didn't care to wait and see. Instead, he directly addressed the creatures. "What are you?" Scar roared at the pack. "Are you aware that you are all trespassing in the Pride Lands?" A scarred, black-muzzled brute stepped forward, his ears pinned back in fury. He seemed to be the leader. "So is she," he snarled, looking directly at Zira with bloodlust in his black eyes. "Don't worry, we'll take her off your paws." Zira bared her fangs, a low hiss escaping her throat. Scar gave her a questioning sidelong glance, without straying his eyes from the threat for too long. "You know these things?" Another one stood beside the first, this one a female. She grinned with menace at the two lions. "This is our alpha Muaji." She nodded at the male canine. "I am his daughter Dekka. We are the Painted Wolves." Painted wolves. He never heard of such animals, not even on their long journey to Malele, the Pride Lands. "Where do you come from?" Scar demanded, his muscles tensed, prepared for the worst. "The Backlands, past Marihi Forest," Dekka replied, her violet eyes gleaming. Her white-tipped tail flicked back and forth like a banner. "The land of leopards and us, of course." The alpha male barked viciously in Zira's direction. "This one stole several of our kills, dragged them into trees out of our reach. A poor mimicry of a leopard, I'd say. But misdeeds against our pack never go unrepaid." "Your pack was careless," Zira spoke up suddenly, her voice full of contempt. "I took what I needed. Lions over all." That last comment earned a snarl from Dekka. She clearly didn't appreciate that, and neither did her alpha, nor the rest of the pack. The painted wolves fanned out, circling the watering hole. Scar's green eyes flicked between them, his tail twitching in unease. These definitely weren't mindless scavengers. They were ruthless, coordinated hunters. "Seems rather excessive, don't you think?" Scar inquired, working hard to maintain his stone-faced and sinister demeanor in the face of danger. "Tracking a lone teenage lioness that far of a distance, just for a couple of snagged kills?" Scar chuckled dryly. "Really? I hardly think that's worth all the trouble, considering she's out of your territory now. So surely that's enough." Scar was hoping he might appeal to the more intelligent wolves in the pack. Perhaps he could convince them all to call off this lion hunt and leave them alone. No such luck. Though Dekka seemed to mull over and consider Scar's words, it was ultimately clear she intended to fulfill her father's wishes. "As our alpha said," Dekka enforced, her voice unwavering and commanding. "This is payback. It doesn't need to concern you, lion. Just hand over the cub." "Or die beside her," Muaji finished, licking his chops as if he was already tasting lion flesh. It was now that Scar faced a choice. Something about Zira stirred emotions within him that made him wonder if perhaps defending her would be the right thing to do. Not just the noble thing to do, but the right thing to do for himself as well. She might become a valuable ally, and he certainly had a shortage of those these days. And he couldn't help but feel sorry for her, knowing she went through the same thing he had with the outsiders. But technically, the painted wolf pack was right. Zira wasn't his business. She was just a stray. Not only that, but she was potentially a rival. She'd already tried to take over his watering hole. Who knows how else she'd take advantage of him? His father, Obasi, had been right to be wary of strays. Like Mufasa. Zira might betray him in a similar way Mufasa had, or worse. Vultures began to circle above the standoff of painted wolves and lions, as if they anticipated the death that would follow. Scar swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. His entire body felt itchy with anxiety. "Well?" Muaji urged, with impatience. "No," Scar answered firmly. He waded ahead of Zira, taking a deliberate step in the water to put himself between Zira and the pack. "She isn't going anywhere." The pack lunged in an instant. Zira, pushing past Scar, was the first to meet them in combat, throwing herself at the nearest painted wolf with a feral snarl. She raked her claws down his flank, sending him yelping backward. Another lunge for her throat, but she twisted midair, her teeth sinking into its leg. Water and black mud sloshed about in the struggle. Scar, however, hesitated. His breath halted as the pack swarmed around them, clearly targeting Zira first. Too many. Too fast. His paws tensed, but his instinct screamed at him to wait for an opening, her to thin their numbers. Zira yowled balefully as an enraged Muaji clamped onto her back leg. Scar's hesitation shattered. With a furious roar, he leaped into the fray. His claws met fur, his fangs tore flesh. Blood sprayed into the air. He fought dirty, swiping at noses, slamming bodies into the dust. Zira fought beside him just as good as any seasoned lioness, with added malice. But the painted wolves were endless. They dragged at his limbs, their jaws relentless, their sheer numbers suffocating. Dekka's teeth snapped inches from his throat. Zira was snarling, but her strikes were slowing. They were losing. Panic gripped Scar's chest, but beneath it, something deeper, primal, ancient, awoke. His breath came in ragged gasps. His claws dug into the dirt. And then, it happened. A power surged through him, raw and wild, clawing its way up from his very bones. Scar reared back, his chest expanding, his lungs filling with something beyond air that he couldn't contain. And he roared. It was no ordinary roar. The sky trembled. Dark clouds churned overhead, swirling unnaturally fast, crackling with unseen fury. The sound of Scar's voice echoed across the Pride Lands, not just his own, but layered, ancient, mighty, like a chorus of the spirits of lions long past. The painted wolves froze in shock after witnessing all of this, unbelieving that a lion could somehow summon a storm, or have more voices than one. Then, the raw power of Scar's roar hammered inside their skulls, rattling them to their core. And then, one by one, their eyes became clouded, hazed. Zira watched, horrified, as the pack in unison began a high-pitched whine that hurt her ears. Straining, she observed the affected wolves all had a look of complete and utter terror on their faces. More fear than perhaps she thought was necessary, even after facing this supernatural phenomenon. It was like the roar had awakened a primal, basal fear inside of them that they couldn't turn off. And then, one after the other, the painted wolves fled. Scar stood tall, his breath heaving as he watched them run off, his heart hammering. The storm clouds lingered, swirling above him, before dissipating as suddenly as they had come. Zira lay panting beside him, beaten and torn up a bit. but smiling with awe. Dung beetle, that, she gasped, was incredible. Scar stared at his own paws, chest rising and falling. He had done that. A slow, dangerous smile curled his lips as the realization dawned on him that he had discovered his own special power.
Yes, he murmured. Yes, it was.
Scar had never felt stronger. He was exhilarated. What sorts of things might he accomplish with this special roar? His brain buzzed with possibilities as he stepped out of the watering hole, shaking off droplets of water and mud from his soaked fur. His excitement was interrupted by the feeling of something brushing up affectionately against his legs and side. Surprised, he immediately turned his large head to face the little lioness, his bright green eyes wide and curious as he regarded her. "You saved my life," Zira breathed, growling softly in gratitude. "Thank you." And as Zira gazed up at him, Scar was amazed to see something shining in her eyes that he'd only seen when he observed the lionesses around Mufasa. Admiration and respect. A low, happy grumble escaped his throat. It was an awkward sound to him, but who cares? He now possessed a powerful roar and a new ally with whom to share this victorious discovery. For the first time since he arrived in Malele, he felt like his dreadful luck might be beginning to turn.
"I think you'd better come with me," Scar told Zira as he began the journey back. "Follow me to Pride Rock."
Zira beamed upon hearing the invitation and matched his gait without a word. She was definitely going with him, this absolutely incredible lion that somehow commanded the weather with a roar and forced all those vicious painted wolves to run like gazelles. This amazing lion that saved her life. He was her hero now. They trekked in silence for a few minutes. They both noticed something odd on the way to Pride Rock. Night had fallen now, and yet many animals that typically only emerged in daylight were bleary-eyed and stumbling about outside their dens. Even a pair of meerkats squinted their way, unable to see properly in the dark, but on high alert. Something very loud and very frightening must have disturbed them. It was easy to guess what. At last, Pride Rock came into view. The natural structure towered above them, a magnificent rock that seemed to pierce through the starry sky.
"It's Taka," Scar suddenly said to Zira in a low whisper. "My real name is Taka."